what is commercial real estate? How would you define it?
Well, that's a very common question. And it comes down to a couple of things. Basically, the residential side deals with personal space. That's where you raise your family. That's where your friends meet around the table. And that's where you entertain your family and friends. Whereas on the commercial side, the commercial real estate side, it's all about investment and making a return on that investment.
Hey, welcome listeners today to our show. I have the distinct honor and privilege of interviewing just an amazing real estate agent, but not your typical real estate agent. This is Chanda Chann. She's a senior investment and sales and leasing agent at Triumph Commercial Realty. Triumph Commercial Real Estate. She focuses in the commercial space. And funny enough, we tried to do this before. We had a technology challenge. So we're hoping today we can actually have our conversation. So Chanda, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. And, neither one of us are really great with technology. So that doesn't really help us get back to where we are. So hope today is more successful than we did before.
Yeah,
I can help you with real estate though.
there you go. And that's the name of the game. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But we're talking about commercial real estate. We have a lot of on the show, a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners. We have a lot of real estate agents because many of those are super successful and they're entrepreneurs in their own light. And many people are buying, investment properties of some type, diving into commercial and what that means and how big that universe is. I'm excited to really dive in with Chance today, at least, scratch the tip of the iceberg here and start the conversation. And Chanda, before we get into all those details, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into commercial, your background and the story.
Well, I started my career on the front desk of a commercial real estate brokerage. And the office itself was responsible for asset management. And this was back in Texas. So I grew up in the Dallas Fort Worth area. So
Mm.
that's a big field for commercial real estate and real estate in general, because it's just a whole lot of territory to cover. So I know from the ground up. So the back end in terms of the paperwork and the documentation and the I guess we can call it the operations, right? Behind the actual deals. So I was able to learn from all the footprint there from the ground up. As I grew leisurely into the industry, I became more intrigued with the brokerage side of the house. And so that's how I started. And I started with an in-house leasing and worked with some of the best landlords and owners out there.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. So was this your first and only career, commercial real estate?
No, not really.
No, you had other
uh,
choices.
there's been a few pivots in my lifetime. So
Okay.
once I went to school for nursing, didn't really like that atmosphere so much. So I got out of there and decided I was going to go and be an IT geek and went to Southern Methodist University in Texas, got my certification in Microsoft engineering and didn't really like computer and being in a room so much. So I said, wherever I fall in next is probably where I'm supposed to be. And I've been in real estate ever since.
Wow, that's good that you got to try a few different things, and it's always funny because, like my daughter's in college today and just have these conversations about kids going into school or whatever, like, what am I going to do? What do I want to study? And it's like, it's a really tough question to ask, right? Because I mean, particularly if you ask an 18-year-old boy what he wants to do, he wants to grow up, he wants to drink beer, drive fast cars, and go snow skiing all the time or something. I mean, it's kind of where I was, but it's good to try some different things fast to get a sense of what you like. But it sounds like, I mean, really the bulk of your career has been in commercial. And what's interesting to me is that you started not from the sales side, but you started from the back end side
Mhm.
and learning, kind of what actually makes things work operationally, which gives you probably almost a deeper or insider's view in how that world operates. So I imagine going to sales, it's really helped that a lot and
It
so
makes
forth in
it
your
for
career.
a well-rounded kind of experience to be able to communicate to the clients from whether they want to have their property managed professionally or if they want to lease out the property. So the intricate details is where it all lies in from a commercial side, because that at the end of the day, the client's really main goal is what's the bottom line.
Mhm.
And our goal and our job is to make that as seamless as possible and successful for everyone because if I do my job, they're successful, they earn what they need to earn, and they deserve to earn that. And then and in return, we get more work. The reward for good work is always more work, and that's and that's something I really cherish a lot.
Yeah, yeah, it seems a little paradoxical, but anyway. I think about that when I go to the gym and I'm sore the next day. It should be the opposite. It should be sore if you lay around and do nothing, right? And then you go to the gym and you're not. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so let's fly this airplane up to about 30,000 feet then and step back and say, what is commercial real estate? How would you define it?
Well, that's a very common question. Clients, customers always say, what's the difference between a residential and a commercial agent? And it comes down to a couple of things. Basically, the residential side deals with personal space. That's where you raise your family. That's where your friends meet around the table. And that's where you entertain your family and friends. Whereas on the commercial side, the commercial real estate side, is all about investment and making a return on that investment. Similar to that in real estate and residential, you do have investments on the residential side as well, but the analytics are quite different. On a commercial side, you're looking at businesses that want to run and operate as an owner user or as an investor. Think of it as a high rise office building, for example. There's different classes of those. And you're an office tenant. It could be an attorney, a CPA's office, or a real estate office. So that's kind of, you have the retail side where it's primarily attracting customers from the street level or inside a mall setting, which I think the indoor mall is now going away. So we're looking at more like outdoor and online purchases as COVID has taken over our lives more. So that in itself has a different levels, I should say, and the parts that allows you to be able to navigate through the different features of those properties is what makes you really valuable as a commercial agent.
Well, yeah, and so I mean, it's a huge universe, right? Personal space. I mean, it seems to me so on the residential side, you've got essentially one use, right?
One, pretty much one use. Um,
Somebody's going to live there, right? Whether
Somebody's
you're
going to live there, and
yeah.
either it's going to be you and your family or your renter.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's like a living space. Is what I usually refer it to.
Right. And so generally anything outside of that that's real estate related, that's not a living space for the most part, you would sort of classify as commercial.
Correct. And the difference in terms of property value, like multifamily, for example, if 4 units and below, duplexes, 3 units or 4 units, those are still within the residential realm of the house.
Right.
So you can still qualify for lending for residential loans on those types of properties. Now, when you get to 5 and above, then you start to now encroaching on the commercial side of lending and then the commercial side of transaction because it's now valued as what is the price per door
Mhm.
as opposed to just the unit as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. We had a project here just recently that was referred to us from a residential lender, and it was a 5 property at the beach, and they wanted to do renovations and just a lot of things, but essentially they were gonna, lease out the spaces and whatnot. And they found out the hard way that that's not a residential property. And
It's a bit challenging,
yeah.
especially if you're trying to, say, for example, if I'm a residential agent, you came to me and you wanted a 5 unit, trying to navigate that through a residential loan, finding it at the later end of the track is making it's a heartache for everyone. So
Yeah.
I usually recommend, agents to kind of really closely hone in on what their specialty is and then work with folks who can specialize in those services.
Yeah, yeah, partner up,
Hmm.
because even within, like you said, when you get into commercial, you're breaking it into you're dissecting it two other major worlds, right? The owner user
Hmm.
versus the investor. And those are
Right.
both huge universes, right?
It is. And it's also on the lending side a bit more involved in terms of time, but also for the client, it's delivery of different documentation from financials. So it's reviewed differently. So that's from the lender side. On the brokerage side, you're looking at doing analytics and finding similar properties if you can do like a comparison for them. And sometimes in residential, you have sales all the time within 30 days or 6 weeks, the deal will close. If everything checks out just fine. For commercial, you're looking at a due diligence time of possibly 45 days at a minimum,
Mm.
and it can go up as much as 180 days out. So the anomalies, I guess, in the transaction itself is extremely involved and time consuming.
Well, so the timeline to identify and acquire a property, whether you're gonna lease it or buy it, which let's get into that too here in a minute, but that's extended quite a bit on commercial. Here's another question that comes to mind for residential people. I mean, we're all taught today to, if we're interested in a home or whatnot, to go to Zillow first, right? And we wanna, like, look up the
Oh
home
no.
shouldn't be
Don't go
plugging
on
them.
Zillow.
I
Don't
should
go.
say I should, that six-letter word.com where you can look up houses and whatnot, but you can't really do that in commercial world, right? I mean, for the most part.
For the most part, you can't. And then the benefit of someone like myself, I have kind of a hybrid knowledge, so I'm able to access the residential MLS as well as the commercial side of the MLS. So on the residential side, you have the MLS that the agents feed into,
Mhm.
and then it feeds into outside sources like Zillow, Realtor.com, and Red. So those third party, I guess, applications or platforms feed from the main MLS. And there's usually like a 2 or 3 days delay, depending on the platform. Zillow, I think, is traditionally 2 to 3 days. And so by the time you see it or the public sees it, then the agents have already contacted their clients and say, hey, this one's on the market. Let's go.
Ah,
And sometimes, it's also that's an automatic. But in the commercial side, when I'm inputting it into the commercial MLS, it's a subscription on its own. If I want to publish it to the public, it's a paid for advertisement.
ah,
So what you see, even if you Google a property, for example, it pops up on sites like LoopNet or Showcase or Office.com.
mm,
Those are paid for advertisement. Not all brokerages are able to pay for that subscription. So that's probably like you're looking at 10 to 15% of what's truly in the MLS. And the MLS is accessible only by the subscribers.
gotcha. So the commercial space is more would so it's more of a black box then, right? In terms
Pretty
of
much, they
know
try to
what's
make
out
it exclusive. I guess it's more like exclusive. Like
mhm,
if you come to me today and you say, "I'm the hi Paul, what do you need?" I know say, "Chanda, I need 2,500 square feet of office
mhm,
with X amount of interior offices, a break room, and my private bathroom."
mhm,
And what I will do is put in the filters into the commercial MLS side, and it will show me a series of property.
mm,
Now, the only exception is if the agent on the other end is as diligent as updating their data,
mhm,
then you get accurate data back. So it's good in, good out.
right, right.
And so I'm able to say, hey, Paul, let's go. We're going to tour time on these ones. Give me your top five loves versus likes, or maybe I should have.
Mhm.
And we'll go and asset tours and we go tour the property that way, which is kind of different because if you're on Zillow today or on realtor.com today, you're going to see exactly what's in the MLS. Though even delayed by a few days, it is the data that's already in. They feed from that source.
So you're seeing other than the 2 or 3 day delay, which is normally not terrible, right? But depending on the market, it could be. We've seen
Yeah.
that. But you're gonna see the entire inventory, and so you can do some couch surfing and whatnot and get a pretty good idea of the market whereas on commercial, not nearly the case, and so I need a professional, someone like you that's a commercial realtor that has access to that and knows it. And then what about, like, on commercial? I mean, in residential, there's negotiation for property. In commercial, I guess maybe we should actually talk about before we get into that, the option, do I buy the space? Do I lease the space? What are the differences and what are they? And then what are the pros and cons just kind of at a high level?
Well, I think the decision to lease or buy is ultimately it comes down to one, the financial of the client, how long they've been in business, for example. And landlords usually need at least 3 years of financial statements to show that they're viable. Some landlords have always been, depending if they know you as an agent. This is where it's different for commercial agents versus residential. If if Paul, you know me and you work with me on past deals, then you know how reliable I am and I will bring you good clients.
Mhm.
So by that, sometimes they'll read the review of the financials for that client.
Mm.
So if you don't know me and I'm just like this person from ABC realty firm and I'm only 6 months in, you're going to be skeptical and like, okay, I need some financials on your client just to make sure that they're sustainable. Because if you're the landlord, you want a lease that is viable for the tenant because you want to be successful as much as they do. And you don't want to be with the tenant that's struggling in their first year. Because as a landlord, when you're owning that property, you're trying to refinance or you're trying to build it to sell. So you want to fill it up with really reliable tenants, responsible tenants, and good paying history tenants. So that's kind of like the I guess the symbiotic relationship between all commercial brokers is we're the source of bringing you a good tenant. And if you're the landlord side, you're relying on that person to bring you that reliable and viable tenant so that they're not like in their first year struggling to pay rent for the landlord. And then now everybody looks bad.
Right, right, because the landlord, their goal is to lease that building up in that scenario with great
Yeah.
paying tenants so that they can either turn around and sell, like you said, sell the building or refinance or whatever.
Mhm.
But the last thing they want to do is chase payments from people. And so so it's pretty involved then. So the 3 years financials to lease, because generally you're also not signing a 12-month commitment, right? In most cases, it's a longer term on a lease.
Most cases, the minimum term for commercial is 3 years.
Mm,
That's what I call the vanilla. Say, for example, you go into a space, you're more than likely going to take that space as a in an as is condition
mhm.
or with minimal like carpet and paint. A good example would be an office space. Say it's a class A, which is cream of the crop. If you go into that space and you come in and you don't like that white wall and you want tan all the way, then they'll go in and do tan and for you, whatever color you want and whatever flooring material you want. They have a selection you can select from. But if you're doing like a 4 year or 5 years or even 7 years, in those cases, landlord will do more than anything to get you in through the door. And that given provided that financials are already like really good with that. So if you want new carpets, new floors, specialized luxury material, luxury vinyl planks, they have those options as well. So most landlords in the class A have a standard. They call it building standard. So you can select from what they have. And every now and then you'll have a custom from clients who want to pick on their own kind of materials.
Right. Right. But so basically what you're saying is if your financials will support it in certain spaces, if you're willing to commit to the 5 or 7 year lease, a little longer term, then they'll work with you. They'll do some upgrades to move you in and brush it up and make it nicer and clean it up and that sort of.
It's definitely very more attractive. You have more leverage in negotiation.
Mhm.
There are some landlords that are willing to do annual leases, but those are more smaller scale.
Mm.
In a big box, that's not very common. The common practice is more like 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there were some businesses I've had in the past and we had commercial leases. I remember a Class A space and I think it was a 5 year lease and they came in and they completely moved walls,
Whatever
drywall,
you want.
whatever we wanted, right? It was a good deal. It was we were paying a lot of money for that space. So I think
They're
they
making it worth your rent.
yeah, right, exactly, make it more the rent. So, okay, so I could do that. I could commit to a 5 year or 7 year, let's say if my business is, can support it. Why wouldn't I just buy a building then in that scenario or buy a space if I'm already going to commit 5 or 7 years and I've got pretty strong financials? What would be the pros and cons there?
The main reason that I've come across in my experience is the client doesn't want to, one, they don't, they're testing the area out before they buy.
Mhm,
And so they want to get their feet wet and then get accustomed to that. The other is financial. Commercial lending does require a lot of paperwork, but it
mhm,
also requires a lot of finances on the buyer side. And most typically, you have to be in a business at least 3 years to provide to provide income and financial statement to show that you're gradually making profit. There are lenders out there. They're not necessarily hard money lenders, but lenders who will work with small businesses that will allow them to buy a building versus leasing. But that could be the most expensive and most oftentimes it's a higher interest rate.
mhm. Mhm.
So it's a combination of everything, but most driven by those two components is testing out the area and seeing how the business will maintain. And if the clientele around there is definitely needing what their services are, then they'll decide. And some have say, we'll do 5 years and then we'll see on year six, maybe we're ready to buy.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, that makes sense. You obviously don't wanna, plunk down into a building and then 3 years into it, you're like, "Man, we're in the wrong area. We should have been down the street here." Oh, in a lot of cases, if that's the case, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but someone could come in and buy a building as an owner user
Mhm.
space for their business, and then hopefully in 3 or 5 years, they can grow out of it maybe and expand and maybe lease that out and move to somewhere else, or maybe buy a building that's a little bit larger than they need if their finances will support it and lease part of it out to help defer some of the cost and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I always recommend for tenants, especially, it's better. And I would say more favorable is when the tenant's outgrowing a space. The landlord will do whatever it takes to help you expand.
Mm.
It is not it's the more like a negative tone if you're going in there taking a bigger bite than what you could necessarily maintain. For example, going into a larger space and the rent is definitely much higher. And then you're having to downsize and you're asking the landlord for rent relief or shaving some of the square footage. That's not so much, it's not as much of a fun conversation at that point. It's
No.
much more fun to talk about growth than it is to
Yeah.
downsize.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, back to the example, I was thinking of the space we had in the early 2000s. That's what we did. We had a Class A space and we were growing. And so about it seemed like every 6 months, but it might have been once a year, whatever, we go to the landlord, which
Mhm,
happened to be, it was part of a REIT is what this was.
mhm,
But they were very flexible and they're like, yeah, we'll give you another 1,000 square feet over here. It was adjacent to our space, and then we just kind of chunked off more space, which was a good day. So, okay, so you get flexibility, you're leasing, maybe you're gonna buy, just depending on your situation. There's options on both of those. Now, what are you seeing now? Or maybe we should go back and say, okay, let's say I have a business and I do need space, commercial space. We're talking about finances, we're talking about timeline. When should I contact somebody like you, Chanda, and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this." Should it be like I'm ready to move, or should it be like, well, I'm kind of thinking maybe this would be a good idea as a next step kind of thing? Where are you in this? Where can you serve them the best and why?
just to dial back a little bit, you mentioned the word REITs. For those of us who don't know, that's real estate investment trust. That's a specialized investment that's a sector within the commercial side as well. So back to your question, where do you want to start? I say when you start thinking about it, it's where I think that become more valuable in helping you navigate the pathway that you need to be. Because by the time you have all this really nice outline of what you want to do and everything, then I come in and deliver the bad news like, oh, that's not the right zoning. Or then you're not going to like me very much. And you're like, oh man, I got to go back to planning again. So once you start like, okay, I'm thinking about opening a restaurant or a coffee cafe, for example.
Mhm.
And you're like, then you call someone like me up and say, hey, Chanda, I want to open a coffee cafe. What kind of property do I need? But also, more importantly, what kind of lease terms do I need in order to get my dreams? And I usually start with, well, what's your wish list?
Mhm.
Everybody's got a wish list. But
Right.
then you say, okay, you have a wish list come in. What is your top priority of those lists? Because you can't have everything right. They
Mhm.
always say, oh, the three things: time, quality, and what is it? Time, quality, money.
Mhm.
Of the three, and you can choose two of the three. Which two would you choose? So you can escalate time, but are you willing to give up quality and pay a little more?
Mhm.
Or you have all the money in the world, maybe time and quality doesn't really matter. But if you want more quality, maybe time will be a little slower and you're going to spend a little bit more money. So I always throw out like those kind of things and help them plan and see the big picture, especially when the client is like new to the brick and mortar
Mhm.
and they've been doing this business all this time, successfully been doing it in their garage
Right.
and they're ready for this lease now. They're like, oh, I have to be married to this space for 3 years.
Mm.
That's the kind of thing is, are you prepared to be locked in for 3 years at this location?
Mm. Mhm.
So, and it is, can your business handle it? Is the big
S-
question.
So there's a lot of thinking through this process. And so what you're saying is, and I'm just reflecting again on my own personal
Mhm.
experiences, is that there's so much you don't know and the timeline takes a while, but reaching out to someone who is a professional like you that can say, well, you need to think through some of these things. This is a process. This is not like, we're gonna sell the house and move in 30 days, right? Being contracted
No.
move. This is not it's not something you do on a whim. And also, again, because as a business owner, I don't know what's in the market. I mean, I see what I see when I drive to the store and come back, and I've got a very limited, we all have a very limited focus. And um, but you know what's going on in the market, right? You might know if I want that coffee shop I want to open, let's say, you might know about a development that's coming in and it's gonna land in 12 months or something, like, right around the corner from where I think I want it, or maybe it's a better location, right? And I've just
Exactly.
don't even know.
Sorry. That was a ding. Let me
The
turn this off
the
real quick.
the popcorn is
The
ready.
the
Alright.
popcorn is ready, the microwave being healthy. No, and you're exactly right. It's specializing, it's understanding the market, it's knowing what development's coming in and, not necessarily make the decision for you, like, that's a great location,
Mhm,
but more so like, okay, you may not wanna be there because there's already 3 coffee shops there.
mhm,
Do you if you're indifferent to competition, then that's no problem. But if that is a thing you're concerned about, then probably not a good thing, right? And it's also about specializing in certain fields and doing that all as opposed to the first time around trying to help you through something that I'm not most familiar with. And it's also the sphere of influence. The community is even the community of brokers are really small,
mhm.
relatively small, even though there's a big number. Everybody kind of knows who they are. And if you're in a small town or even I call this a small big town, Virginia Beach, we're in what they call a tertiary market. So, with that said, it's relatively speaking, geographically, we're spread out, but the number of people doing business itself is pretty small.
Mhm.
And the network is amazing.
Which again, it is such a it's like it's an insider's game, right? I mean, because you know each other, you know who's doing what, who the different players are, the moving pieces. You guys meet a lot.
Um,
I think you're very
New businesses trying to get their first brick and mortars and location and storefronts.
yeah, and so knowing so having a professional like Chanda, like you're dialed in and you know this is what you do, you're experienced, but you're also connected not just to MLS, but to the live people that are in the industry in our community. And so you can help me, that small business guy, say, okay, you're gonna help me navigate based on what I'm trying to do. And the question could be, do I really want to commit to 3 years? Is that going to be too long? Or do I want to lock in as long as I can? Or maybe I want to buy because this particular area is going to be, in 5 to 7 years, is going to be cost prohibitive and just really
Mhm.
hot, which I'm thinking of like Town Center in Virginia Beach. I think,
Yes.
how that grew, the Chesapeake, the Greenbrier area there, over there with the, you know,
Right off of Battlefield, Greenbrier, the Summit
yeah,
Point. I
hmm,
think
all
you're
that.
referring to, yeah, that's called Summit Point. They're like 68 acres
Mhm.
of new development there. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and so if you could have positioned yourself, like, right there before all this goes down, right? You're in good shape.
That's the big question. Had I known now what I knew then, what I should have known then.
Right, right,
That's
but
key. That's the really what's really into our real estate though. That's kind of the risk you take with investments,
yeah,
even on homes. When
yeah,
you're buying into a brand new development, for example, you're hoping that the upcoming homes and all the neighbors coming in is going to be maintained and sustain kind of the quality and value that you're looking into, right?
right,
So commercial, it's the same way. But commercial, take for example, a neighborhood center is anchored by a grocery store.
mhm,
They're hoping that the residential will back them up and bring them shoppers and buyers. So it's a hand in hand play between the two side of the real estate is the residential helps thrive, the business and the commercial side thrive. And where the commercial businesses are, it helps provide the services to the community.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's very symbiotic and yeah, and no matter what you do, whether you're ultimately gonna lease a space or buy a space, or invest in something else, as you
Yeah.
mentioned. I mean, you wanna make the most intelligent, informed decision you can make, right? You can't
Yeah, and
eliminate all risk.
it is, and to try you may not eliminate all the risks, but at least eliminate some of the high risks.
Mm,
And that's where the importance of a commercial broker comes in on an agents like myself to be able to do the analytics and give you the profile of the community and say, well, I'm going to do a coffee shop here. Did you know there was 3 or 4 others just less than a mile away?
mm, mm,
To be able to identify those things so that you don't have to struggle and try to compete with the other locations near to you. And maybe the profile of what your services is trying to provide isn't there for you in that community.
right.
Maybe people don't want pizza. For example, just the kind of things you kind of think about, like in residential, you can't really use demographics as part of the sales, but in business, the demographic and the profile of the community is available to that business owner to be able to develop their business plan to make them successful. Because if you're selling a service that's not needed in that community,
Right,
then it's not going to help you any to even though you have the best price property that you just purchased
right.
or you have the best lease deal in the place. So that's just kind of a simple way to look at from a big picture standpoint on where you want to lease it, where you want to go, and how long you want to be there.
Yeah, yeah, and just kind of a final thought on that is, like, just a simple thing, to think about, like, sometimes just that location in itself is enough advertising to drive in business that you
Mhm.
need, and maybe it's worth paying more for a space that's gonna do that versus being tucked away around a corner where nobody knows where you are, and now you have to find another way to drive traffic and customers into your business. And, of
Well,
course, some businesses don't care about the traffic, right? So just
you're
that.
right. So that leads up to the next thing. I mean, when you and I talked about it, is what are the types of properties that are considered commercial? Well, commercial have different sectors. You have retail, and you have office, and then you have industrial, and then you have also multifamily. So those are the four main categories, right? But within each category, it has its own subset. For office, for example, you have classes. You have class A, B, and C. A being cream of the crop, class C being lower in the totem pole. They tend to be the older buildings with less amenities. And then retail centers, you have different complexes. You have neighborhood centers, you have strip centers,
Mhm.
you have the convenience stores. So it has so many subsets within its own category. And multifamily in itself, you also have mixed use, where you have multifamily condos on the upper levels, and then the ground level are all retail. So it's could be a combination. So that kind of goes to what you're saying. Like, do you need street exposure? How much exposure do you need? Well, an accountant may not care to be out there on the street level. Maybe they just need an office space. And so they're not paying for a retail rate, which is probably a little bit higher because of the street exposure. And but if you're selling men's shoes and apparel and you need that foot traffic,
Yeah.
then you maybe want to consider a retail space.
Right. Right. Yeah, so there's so many variables that go into it, and that's what makes it fascinating and really interesting, to me, much more so than residential. That's kind of boilerplate,
Yeah. Just like you were saying then, residential, you're only there for one primary reason.
One
Other than
reason.
that,
Yeah,
there
that's
be your
it.
family.
That's it, that's it, that's it. Well, Chana, this has been great. I think we're probably up on time now. I know we've uncovered a lot of topics, and we've talked about maybe coming back and drilling down a little deeper in some of these areas more specifically. But how, in the meantime, how do people get up with you if they're starting to ponder this idea of, hey, maybe I need a commercial space or a bigger space or maybe a second space or whatever. How do they reach out to you?
I'm accessible in every way possible. I'm online. You can find me at Chanda Chann. That's my hashtag. And then you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I don't use Twitter as much. It's there, but I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook. And you can also call me and text me on my cell phone at 757-202-9548 or email me at chandachan@gmail.com.
And that's Chan with two N's.
Yes, our family took all the ends.
Oh my gosh. Well, Chanda, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for your time today and coming on.
Well, you're amazing. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to doing more. I think we can break it down to the different subsets and dive deeper into it.
Awesome. Yes, we will.